On the 12th of March 2024, Farmtransparencyproject's Executive Director Chris Delforce and Strategy and Campaigns Director Harley McDonald-Eckersall gave evidence at a hearing for the Victorian Parliamentary Inquiry into the welfare of farmed pigs.
I declare open the Legislative Council Economy and Infrastructure Committee's public hearing for the inquiry into pig welfare in Victoria. Please ensure that mobile phones have been switched to silent and that background noise is minimised. I would like to begin this hearing by respectfully acknowledging the Aboriginal peoples, the traditional custodians of the various lands we are gathered on today, and pay my respects to their ancestors, elders and families. I particularly welcome any elders or community members who are here today to impart their knowledge of this issue to the committee, or who are watching the broadcast of these proceedings in the public gallery or via the live broadcast. We'll get committee members to now introduce themselves quickly, starting with Ms Broad.
Hi, I'm Gail Broad, Member for Northern Victoria.
Bev MacArthur, Member for Western Victoria.
Renee Heath, Eastern Victoria Region.
Catherine Copsey, Member for Southern Metropolitan Region.
Georgie Purcell, Northern Victoria.
John Berger, Member for Southern Metro.
Tom McIntosh, Member for Eastern Victoria.
Witnesses, all evidence taken is protected by parliamentary privilege as provided by the Constitution Act of 1975 and further subject to the provisions of the Legislative Council standing orders. Therefore, the information you provide during this hearing is protected by law. You're protected against any action for what you say during this hearing, but if you go elsewhere and repeat the same things, those comments may not be protected by this privilege. Any deliberately false evidence or misleading of the committee may be considered a contempt of Parliament. All evidence is being recorded. You'll be provided with a proof version of the transcript following the hearing, and transcripts will ultimately be made public and posted on the committee's website. For the Hansard record, can you please state your name and any organisation you're appearing on behalf of?
Chris Delforce, Farmtransparencyproject.
Harley McDonald-Eckersall, Farmtransparencyproject.
Wonderful. We now welcome you to make your opening comments and presentation, but ask that it's kept around 10 minutes maximum. And I just want to now issue a warning to anyone in the public gallery or watching via the live broadcast that the following opening remarks could have some confronting footage, and you're welcome to turn off now or leave the room if you wish.
Okay. Point of order, Chair. Is the footage going to be presented now or after Mr Delforce's presentation?
It's part of the opening remarks.
Okay. Thank you. Well, then I'm going to leave the room because I think it's outrageous that
That's
we're
fine, Mrs.
presenting
MacArthur.
this material, and
That's
I
fine.
don't want to be here to condone it.
We still have quorum. That's fine.
That's fine, I'll leave too. Thank you.
One second. We're subcommittee, that's fine. All good, got quorum. Wonderful, great.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. 12 years ago, I entered a piggery for the first time, a place called Wally's, just outside of Canberra. It was the most horrific thing I'd ever seen. Over a period of 2 months, I returned with a small team of amateur investigators, documenting what we were seeing each night, our presence unknown to the operators. When we were finished building the strongest possible case, we reported it to the authorities and published our findings for the world to see. The news coverage was enormous, and for most of the people who saw our footage or photographs, it was their first ever exposure to the reality of Australian pig farming. They were understandably outraged. The Australian pork industry distanced itself, claiming that this piggery was not representative. Wally was just a rogue operator, one bad apple. Even then, I knew they were lying. In those 12 years since, I've entered 91 active pig farms, 37 of them here in Victoria, and have seen unacceptable cruelty in every single one. Sow stalls are small metal cages in which mother pigs are confined while pregnant for weeks at a time. In these cages, pigs are unable to turn around or take more than 1 or 2 steps forwards or backwards. I'm going to start the first video. Australian Pork Limited made a commitment to phase out sow stalls by 2017, 7 years ago, yet they are still in use today in Victorian piggeries. The most recent data published by APL in their 2021 annual report reveals that almost a quarter of piggeries still use these archaic devices. They stopped publishing data on the phase-out after that, but they still love to boast about this failed initiative. Meanwhile, they've made no commitment at all to end the use of farrowing crates, small pens containing even smaller cages, where sows are confined for up to 6 weeks while they give birth to and nurse their piglets. Every intensive breeding piggery in Victoria still uses farrowing crates.
In these crates, newborn piglets are subjected to a series of painful surgical mutilations without any kind of anaesthetic or pain relief. Their tails are cut with scissors, their teeth are cut back, chunks are cut out of their ears as a method of identification. These unnecessary procedures are performed not by qualified veterinarians, but by untrained farmhands. The runts of the litter, and any piglets who seem sick or weak, are not given treatment or care, because that would cost more time and money than pig farms can be bothered investing. Instead, these piglets are picked up by their back legs and slammed headfirst onto the floor, not a metre away from their mothers who watch on helplessly. In large piggeries like Midland Bacon near Stanhope, this happens every morning. Sows endure a repeated cycle of forced impregnation, giving birth and having their piglets taken away from them. This forced impregnation is done through artificial insemination, which the Queensland Government outlines as follows. Workers first clean the sow's vulva with a cloth or paper towel. They then manually stimulate her by applying pressure between her shoulder and mid-back, applying knee pressure to her flanks, and massaging her vulva and udder. A tube of boar semen, collected by masturbating boars by hand, is attached to a catheter, which is then inserted into the sow's vagina and the semen pushed into her uterus. This kind of sexual abuse and exploitation in any other context would be considered bestiality. But the pig farming industry is granted an exemption because it relies on bestiality for this everyday procedure. When our investigators installed hidden cameras at Midland Bacon to capture the mutilation and killing of piglets, they also captured the sickening, inevitable outcome of the normalisation of sexual abuse. After the lights have gone off in the farrowing shed for the day, a male worker is seen approaching a caged sow from behind, lowering his pants and raping her for several minutes. Confined to a farrowing crate, she has no way to escape. This is the kind of thing that you hear rumours about all the time. You have to wonder how many times he's done this when our cameras weren't watching. How often this happens in piggeries all over this state and this country. The perpetrators so comforted by the secrecy this industry fights so hard to protect. This Parliament has been debating new laws aimed at quashing the exposure of cruelty and abuse in farms and slaughterhouses under the thin guise of biosecurity. Surely workers raping sows is the greater threat to biosecurity.
When pigs reach 6 months of age, or sows become less productive, after a couple of years of repeated impregnation and farrowing, they are sent to slaughter. In 1992, 32 years ago, the pig farming industry quietly installed its first carbon dioxide gas chamber at a slaughterhouse in Corowa, New South Wales. Today, these chambers are used in all major pig slaughterhouses as a way to render pigs unconscious or dead before their throats are cut open. Anyone who wanted to know what this looks like was told that it's the most humane method of stunning pigs before slaughter, that pigs just gently fall asleep. In 2014, we managed to install hidden cameras in that Corowa slaughterhouse, capturing and publicly exposing for the first time in the world what really happens inside those chambers. Subsequent investigations here in Victoria and in South Australia showed the exact same thing, that every pig who enters those chambers screams and thrashes as they slowly suffocate, desperately trying to escape until their last agonising breath. That was 10 years ago that the inherent unjustifiable cruelty of these chambers was first exposed. And yet Australian Pork Limited continues to spout this utter nonsense about pigs gently falling asleep. Last year, we re-exposed all 3 gas chamber slaughterhouses in Victoria. We had to climb down into those chambers to retrieve our hidden cameras, and we felt the merciless, terrifying burning of the gas as it infiltrated our eyes, nostrils, and lungs. Video seems to have been cut short. I hid above one of these chambers with a camera for over 9 hours and saw firsthand as the life was drained from pig after pig in the most excruciating of ways. Those images and those haunting screams fading to silent gasps will never leave me. This is the price we pay to reveal to consumers what they are paying for when they purchase pork, bacon and ham. We don't want to do this. We don't want to risk our lives, our safety, our freedom, our psychological well-being to enter these places and document these awful things, but if we don't, nobody will. We believe that an industry so utterly dependent on secrecy and legal loopholes has no right to exist at all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, invite them back in. We'll start with members on the screen, although I can't see you. I presume I can probably hear you. Mr. McIntosh?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you for both attending. I just wanted to ask, given your sort of long history in this space, as far as the way abattoirs and husbandry process is working, do you see there are farmers, industry working in this space that are trying to achieve it? There are ways that they can be helped to achieve better. Like, do you see common ground that can be worked on from what you think are better practices that industry are trying to achieve or want to achieve, and how they can be assisted to do so?
Ultimately, we don't believe that pigs should be bred, raised and killed for food. We don't believe it's necessary. We think that the government needs to be investing in plant-based alternatives. We think they need to be assisting farmers who want to get out of this industry. I think the farmers who are putting in those efforts to improve their practices are doing so because they care about pigs. But ultimately, welfare is incompatible with this industry, fundamentally. The two cannot go hand in hand. And I think those farmers ultimately are going to want to get out of that industry, and they need to be helped to do that. And at the end of the day, all these pigs, no matter how well they are treated on the farm, are ending up in slaughterhouses, and most of those are using these gas chambers, which are apparently the most humane method of doing it. And we've seen how very far from humane that is. There is no way to do this in a humane way. There's always fear and suffering and pain. And when we exposed those chambers last year, even farmers were coming out and saying this is horrific. They don't want to support this anymore, but there's no alternatives. There is no alternative that's good. The only answer is to help people get out of this industry and into more sustainable, ethical lines of work.
And sorry, just yourself on that one. Yep. And so do you think there are, I suppose you're saying you don't think there are any, like when you say you don't think there are more humane methods, is there a scale? Are there some that are doing better than others in as far as that treatment or, coming to end of life, that sort of things?
Well, we've investigated all the different types. So as well as the gas chambers, we've investigated electrical stunning, bolt gun stunning and rifle stunning. And every time we've seen, it's pretty horrific. A lot of the time the stunning fails, animals are conscious or partly conscious when they're being killed. And there's a lot more rough handling involved in getting those animals to the point of being killed. Often it's done in front of each other, so they're able to see their friends or their siblings dying before them. So we haven't seen any way that is being done that's better or good, and the industry itself acknowledges that these other methods are even worse than gas chambers.
I think when most people imagine humane slaughter, they imagine something that isn't possible or realistic or happening anywhere, which is an animal leading a good life and then experiencing a death without pain, without fear, without suffering. We've investigated 13 slaughterhouses in the last year alone. Not one time have we seen a death that is without pain, without fear, without suffering. Not only that, at every single one of those slaughterhouses, we've seen multiple violations of state and federal regulation. And I think your question was about farmers and asking whether there's kind of a scale of farmers who treat pigs better, maybe. And, you know, there's definitely a long way between farmers such as the one we saw in that video sexually violating a pig and a farmer who is maybe running a free-range pig farm. But ultimately, no matter what, all those pigs are being sent to the gas chamber, or 90% of pigs are being sent to a gas chamber. The others are being electrocuted to death or shot with a bolt gun. So no matter what we say about farming practices, and I truly believe that a lot of farmers do care about their animals and like to think that they are doing their best to treat them with care and respect, ultimately, at the end of the day, they're sending them to slaughter, and there is no humane way to slaughter them.
I think farmers are being misled too, and that's why we saw so many support us when we exposed those gas chambers, because they've been sending their pigs to these places and being told that their pigs are being given humane deaths, and now they're seeing what that actually looks like, and they're disgusted by it. As a farmer, you can't go into a slaughterhouse and go look inside a gas chamber because these are enclosed boxes. There's no way to see inside them without physically going in with a gas mask while it's operating.
Yeah, sorry, Chief, one more quick one if I can.
A very quick one.
Okay, so with mobile abattoirs or other methods, do you see better practice in that?
I mean, I guess we haven't seen that, but they're going to use the same methods, the bolt gun, the electric stun, which is subject to human error all of the time. And the thing is that those mobile slaughterhouses, maybe they can kill a few animals a day. They can't kill the 5 million pigs that we are killing at the moment in this country.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Mr. McIntosh. Mr. Berger.
Thank you, Chair. And my question is, do you consider that the current Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act adequately addresses concerns the general public might have with the pig husbandry and slaughter? And if not, do you feel a new proposed act will serve this purpose?
The POCTA itself, I think, does cover, it essentially forbids cruelty. The issue is that we have these codes of practice that then say, okay, here's all the kinds of cruelty you can legally do. The other thing is that POCTA doesn't cover slaughter. That's the Meat Industry Act, which relates to AS 4696, the federal standard, which basically also says that pigs or all animals must be slaughtered with no unnecessary pain, suffering, etc. And arguably gas chambers are not in line with that standard. Arguably all slaughter is not in line with that standard. And I think that all farming and slaughtering of animals commercially is pretty far out of touch with community expectations when they think that, if they think that animals are being treated well and humanely and being given humane deaths, it is very far from the reality.
I think the other big thing is that POCTA at the moment, and this is also relevant to the Crimes Act, the actual criminal kind of law act in Australia, if it was applied as written to the practices in farms, most of what happens in farms would be considered illegal. However, there are exemptions built into POCTA which allow things that are listed as being illegal to be performed on farmed animals for the purposes of agriculture. So for example, if there was a dog or a cat and you were to cut their tail off with scissors or cut their teeth back with pliers, that would be illegal under POCTA. The only thing that makes it legal are these exemptions which allow that, even though it's done without any kind of pain relief, without any kind of anaesthetic. The Crimes Act as well. So at the moment we're dealing with a charge of bestiality. What we said in our statement about most of the things that are done during the normal procedures of artificial insemination are classified under bestiality. Pigs are being sexually penetrated with objects by farmers, and that would be considered bestiality if it wasn't for a specific exemption which makes it legal to do so if it is being performed by a veterinarian person or an agriculture worker in good faith. And that makes me ask the question, when is it ever in good faith to sexually penetrate an animal?
Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Mr. Berger. You touched on it briefly in your comments before, but can you tell us a little bit more about the response from the pork industry after you released footage of pigs being gassed by carbon dioxide?
So largely the industry's response was to ignore the issue and hope that it goes away. They refused several requests to be interviewed for the ABC 7:30 story. They did eventually put out a statement, but it was the usual empty rhetoric that we always see from them. I quote, Australian Pork Limited's position is consistent. We care about our pigs, and as an industry, we share the community's concern for the welfare of animals. That's why we continue to recommend global best practice, drawing on CO2 stunning, the most humane and effective method of managing pig welfare during processing. The entire Australian pork industry takes the welfare of our animals through their whole life very seriously, and we're seeking to receive and review the full footage. But they ignored our offers to actually send them the footage or to discuss the issue with us. We turned up to their office with a hard drive with the footage and asked to give it to them so they could watch it. And instead of meeting with us, they turned off all the lights and quietly slipped out the back door. The Federal Agriculture Minister, Murray Watt, and the Victorian Agriculture Minister at the time, Gail Tierney, also ignored numerous requests to meet with us or even to respond to the footage. And for the two remaining gas chamber slaughterhouses in Victoria, as AFG has since ceased operating as a slaughterhouse, but the Sinclair Abattoir in Benalla and Diamond Valley Pork in Laverton, they are continuing business as usual. They're still using their gas chambers. Nothing has changed.
Thank you. Could you please provide the committee some examples of I guess what you would deem poor animal welfare? Obviously, we have routine practices that we understand are completely legal and regularly used, but could you explain some of the worst instances of poor animal welfare that you've documented?
Yeah, well, as you say, so much of the routine practices that exist are what we would consider poor welfare. I mean, how is it okay to pick up a piglet by their back legs and smash them on the floor? But that's done every single day, and that's just normal. But I think that people would be horrified if you were doing that to puppies or kittens.
I think things that we see very commonly in most piggeries across Australia are, well, I mean, again, you say sow stalls, sows confined for weeks at a time, but that's legal. However, you see these sows who then have these horrific pressure sores from just being unable to move to lying on their sides. Often those become infected. Often we see piglets who are sick and dying, crushed by their mothers, even though farrowing crates are said by the industry to be in place to prevent that very thing. So these piglets are dying, these horrific deaths. These facilities are filled with rats, cats, maggots. So you see food filled with maggots, you see rats running around the ceilings. If a piglet or a mother pig is sick or injured or has an injury, they're often being eaten by cats and rats even while they're still alive. At the same time, you're seeing things like overextended sows being kept in extreme confinement for longer than is legal as well.
A number of years ago, there was a sow we came across in a farrowing crate. She'd given birth to a litter of stillborns. Something had gone wrong. It caused paralysis in her back legs. She was unable to pull herself to the food and water at the front of the farrowing crate. She started eating her own legs. And the farmers came and looked at her. They brought the vet in. The vet just said, I'll leave her for the weekend, see if she gets any better. Of course, she didn't. So after several days of that agony and starvation and cannibalizing herself, she was just shot. And no charges were ever laid. Nothing ever came of that. We went to the police, but it was just used to charge us with trespass.
Is that illegal? That treatment of that specific pig?
I think it's a...
Sorry.
I think it's a dereliction of a duty of care. And I think this is where the lines become blurry, because that kind of thing, if you saw in another animal, is where you'd call the RSPCA. You'd say this animal is being mistreated. They have no access to food and water. They have horrific injuries. They're not being cared for. However, the RSPCA has no jurisdiction on agricultural issues. So you call Agriculture Victoria. However, they're covered by these exemptions, and they'd say, well, it's an industry thing because the pig industry, like other areas of animal agriculture, is regulated by codes of practice, which aren't legally enforceable. So no one wants to step on the toes of the industry, which is largely allowed to do whatever it wants and set its own standards. So it becomes this black hole of suffering where no one really can step in and do anything. So for instance, in this kind of instance where we have seen specifically criminal act, where a worker is sexually assaulting a pig, that is something where we were able to contact Victoria Police and say, this has happened, here is the evidence, and they have made an arrest. In other circumstances, where the circumstances that Chris mentioned, where pigs are in this incredible amount of suffering, there is no care being offered to them. Victoria Police have been contacted, RSPCA have been contacted, Agriculture Victoria have been contacted, but nowhere really has the authority to do anything.
Thank you. Ms. Copsey.
Thank you. Thank you for your submission and for attending today. I wanted to go to, you just touched on industry self-regulation and progress around, limiting some of these practices in how things are done. I wondered if you could speak to the history of self-regulation around sow stalls and how the industry is going in terms of a voluntary phase-out and your observations around the effectiveness of that.
So the last data that we've seen published from them was in their 2021 annual report, and it was about a 4/5 uptake of the voluntary phase-out. We investigated a number of piggeries in Victoria a couple of years ago. We found 6. Pretty much every place that we visited still had sow stalls. At Midland Bacon, they have this massive shed full of hundreds of sow stalls, one of the largest that I've seen, and that is still operating today. I believe maybe 1 or 2 of the other 6 have since stopped using sow stalls, but it's still quite widespread, and it seems like the industry has kind of given up on that phase out because they've stopped publishing that data. But they still like to talk about, oh, we've made this great commitment to phase them out. By 2017, 7 years ago. I think they first made that commitment back in 2012 or 2013 because there was a lot of public outrage directed at sow stalls. There'd been some exposure, thanks to footage, of sow stalls, and people were, quite rightly outraged.
I think what we see time and time again is this outrage. People see the reality of how pigs are farmed and they are shocked. And then there's a lot of promises, but then once the media attention dies away, there's nothing to follow through on that. I think one of the issues that often isn't talked about as well is that while the industry made this kind of self-selected decision to phase out sow stalls, they were also given free rein to pick the alternative to sow stalls. What they've gone with in the majority of cases is what's known as group housing. So these are large kind of open pens. They still contain sow stalls, however they're not enclosed at the back, so pigs can kind of choose to go in and out to kind of have privacy. In most cases, when you see these pens, there's an extremely large number of pigs in these pens. There's no set limit on how many pigs can be forced into these open pens. They're filthy. The floor is either concrete or slatted metal bars, which they're forced to walk on, lie on, stand on, sometimes even give birth on if they're not moved to the farrowing crate in time. And we've seen a pig who has given birth in one of those group housing stalls. Her piglets are being trampled on by other sows. There's also higher instances of fighting in these stalls as well. So when the industry is allowed to set not only kind of phasing out practices which have lost the approval of the public, but they're also allowed to set what they're phasing out into, what the alternative is. Like, how is that going to be any better? Because they're bound by what is going to be the most profitable, and animal welfare is not profitable.
Thank you. And in the short time I've got left, I just wanted to go to the prevalence of the use of stunning in Victoria's industry. I think you spoke to that briefly before, but can you speak to us about the number of piggeries and the prevalence of stunning and abattoirs?
Yes, so there's 2 major pig slaughterhouses that are left in Benalla and in Laverton. They both have these carbon dioxide gas chambers, so I'm not sure of the percentage, but a very large percentage of Victoria's pigs, and also pigs from interstate, end up at these 2 slaughterhouses. There's also a number of smaller slaughterhouses like Gather Coals at Wangaratta that uses electric stunning. And there's maybe 1 or 2 other very small slaughterhouses that use, I'd say, electric stunning. But for the most part, most pigs are going into these carbon dioxide gas chambers.
Thank you. And I'll just say for the record, you correctly interpreted my question. I meant to ask about gassing, so thank you for covering that.
Thanks, Ms Copsey. Dr Heath.
Thank you, and thank you for your submission. In your opinion, is there a way that to keep the pork industry going that you would consider moral?
Only as a phase out, to help people move into other lines of work. We don't want people to lose their income. We don't want people to go poor or families to suffer and starve. We're not thinking that this is something that can ever happen overnight, and that's not what we're suggesting, but we think there needs to be given serious consideration to a government program to help farmers and encourage farmers to move out into some other kind of industry. And what that is depends on many things, like what their property can sustain, what other methods of income they are appropriate to them.
I think there's other industries that have over time lost social license, become environmentally unviable. We're seeing this right now in the environmental sector as well. Industries that have been a big part of our lives, of our culture for a long, long time, which are now having to be phased out. And I think there's a certain cultural block to imagining a world where we don't mass farm animals for food. But I think that's really, it's very possible, and it should be something that's in our minds. For instance, there's such a wide variety of plant-based alternatives now. There's cell-based agriculture. Magic Valley, which is a Victorian-based company, is creating pork without the pigs. This should be the future. I mean, it's meat. It's created without farming and without killing animals. So I think there has been many industries over time which have become no longer in line with our values. And if we didn't say, okay, yes, this is no longer lining up with what we value as a society, and move away from it, then we wouldn't be where we are today. And I think this is another time where we can stand up and say, let's move towards a kinder world.
I mean, industries closing and changing and adapting is nothing new. It's been happening forever, and maybe it's not about values, but you can't walk down the street and go to a video rental store anymore. The world has changed, and attitudes towards the farming of animals for food have changed. People know more about animal agriculture. They care more about farmed animals than they ever have, and the industry just wants to keep going business as usual, change nothing, adapt to nothing, and for a long time, they've had the support to do that.
Thank you. So pig products are the second most consumed source of protein in Victoria. If you are successful in forcing out the pig industry and forcing it to close, will you be trying to ban imported pig products into Victoria?
I think our focus is on care for Australian pigs. That's why we're here, and that's what we're here to talk to today. I think there's a whole discussion about what an industry in transition looks like, and whether it's about what people are deciding to pay money for to get shipped overseas. But ultimately, right now, I think we need to reflect on what our values are as a country. And I think what we know and what we've seen time and time again when this kind of footage comes out is that most Australians do care about animals, are animal lovers, recognise animals as sentient as well, which is being reflected in the updates to the animal cruelty laws. So most Australians don't like these practices, don't want them happening in their country, and I think that's where we need to start.
I think the phase out of this industry would have to come with a lot of public education initiatives that I think would go a long way towards people choosing themselves not to eat pigs, because most people who eat pigs, the only reason they're doing so is they don't know what they're paying for. They don't know they're paying for cruelty. And if they are made aware of that, I don't think they're going to choose to pay for imported products.
Thanks, Dr. Heath. Mrs. McArthur.
Thank you. Let's be clear here, whether it's Aussie Farms or the Farmtransparencyproject, you want to end meat and livestock production for human consumption,
Yes.
correct?
Absolutely.
Okay, so we just so that we're totally transparent, you're vegans,
Yep.
and you think that nobody should be eating meat and we shouldn't be producing meat for the purposes of human consumption.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, we believe
good.
it doesn't align with their values.
Correct. Okay, so The pork industry is responsible for 3,170 direct and indirect jobs, 335 million the gross value, 31 million in export value, 90% of pig products are consumed locally, 10% are exported. So, and Victoria is a key contributor to the Australian pig industry. You'd like this entire industry shut down, correct?
Yes, and those people moved into more ethical, sustainable lines of work that actually have a future, because this industry simply does not have a future. It is inevitable that the more people who find out about this are going to stop supporting it, and this industry will crumble on its own. The question is whether we support those farmers now to get out of it, get into new lines of work, or whether we leave them... Such as plant-based agriculture, such as cell-based agriculture, such as
agrotourism.
Agrotourism, other kinds of farming, hemp farming, whatever it may be, whatever their property is suitable for. There's not a one-stop solution for all of it, but we need the investment and the research to be happening now.
I also think that it's important to note that this inquiry has been initiated not because there's been any discussions around profitability of pig farming, but because there's been multiple concerns and critical problems over many, many years with farmers, slaughterhouse workers treating pigs horribly. This is an inquiry into pig welfare, and ultimately we need to discuss whether the welfare of farmed pigs is acceptable to most Australians.
Okay, let's be clear here. This inquiry was not put forward through the Parliament. This is a self-referenced inquiry from a member of this committee. So it didn't have the support of the Legislative Council chamber for this inquiry to go ahead. So let's be quite clear about that. Do you understand that trespassing onto property could lead to mass animal deaths by contravening these arrangements?
I understand that sending 5 million pigs to slaughter every year leads to mass animal deaths. I also understand that there was an inquiry into this very thing in 2019, and that's not within the terms of reference of this inquiry.
Yeah, I was on that inquiry, and
I remember.
and we learnt of your position that you want to kill the meat livestock industry in this country.
We want to stop killing, actually.
Yeah, well, no, you want to kill an industry.
We want to
let's
stop
be
killing.
quite clear about this.
I think you can't. I think it's
let's have
important to
questions.
note
planning
that you
and,
can't kill an
decision-making,
industry, but you can kill a sentient animal.
In the planning and decision-making your organisation makes to illegally enter farm properties, have you ever considered the mental anguish that you cause staff on these properties and the risk to animal health? Do you consider it, or is that okay?
I think anyone caught doing the wrong thing is going to experience some anguish. I don't think that means you shouldn't expose them for doing the wrong thing.
So you should act illegally. That's okay? You condone
I think my
illegal
question
activity, do you?
is that if you see a person raping an animal, would you consider their mental anguish before reporting them to the police?
Absolutely. That's
So
an
you would
illegal
not-
activity.
so you
That's
wouldn't-
an illegal activity.
Under federal regulations, causing an animal during and before slaughter an unmeasurable amount of pain and suffering is illegal. So what is happening in Australian slaughterhouses could be and is an illegal practice.
Thank you, Mrs. MacArthur. Ms. Broad.
Yes, I did want to ask your submission. I've read your submission and it says that I've visited 66 slaughterhouses and 109 pig farms across Australia. Most of these visits have been the result of trespass without the knowledge or consent of the owners of the facilities.
Yes.
So you are breaking the law?
Absolutely.
Right.
Full transparency, that's what we do. It's the only way that people will see inside these places, because these places are never going to open the doors for the public. The only reason we're having this inquiry, the only reason anyone knows anything about this industry is because people like us risk their lives and their freedom and their safety and their psychological well-being to break the law and go and get this footage and expose it. And by all means, charge us, fine us, send us to jail. We take that risk. We accept that risk the moment we push open an unlocked door, jump over a fence, whatever it may be, to hold up a camera and film cruelty to an animal. We think that the cruelty to that animal should be considered the worst crime than jumping a fence to film it.
Okay, and what charge did you receive relating to the break-in in the Benalla abattoir?
We've received no charges for any of the footage that we've released.
But for when they...
Oh, for the action. Where we... So Last year, 30 activists entered Benalla Slaughterhouse and locked on, stopping the operations for about 10 hours. This was in direct response to the footage that came out of the gassing of pigs. There was a lot of people who were really outraged about this and felt like they had to do something directly.
So who's paying the legal fees for that?
Ideally, the people who are involved in doing it themselves, but if we can contribute then as an organisation, then we will.
Okay. Now, you said that you've been vegetarian since 2002, vegan since 2011, and clearly want an end to the pig industry. Is that your view of chickens, of beef?
Yes,
lamb,
it is. From what I've
fish?
seen in the more than a decade that I've been investigating all these industries, they are all inherently cruel, and I think not in alignment with most Australians' values. So,
Okay, so you want to see them all closed
yes.
down?
Yes, phased out, to be specific.
Right, I guess, yes, your recommendations, there's a 2-year phase out of commercial pig farming must be announced. So just out of interest to your concern for animal welfare, when you've come across things that have not been appropriate behaviour, have you passed that information on immediately to
Yes.
the authorities?
In most cases, yes. Sometimes we know that we need to build a case. We know we need to show that this is routine, because if it's just a one-off, it gets treated as a one-off. You know, if we've only got an hour of footage showing an animal not being stunned properly, they can ignore it and say, oh, that was just a one-off. But if we've got days showing the exact same thing happening over and over again, we show that it's a systemic problem.
So
And
you've undertaken your own investigation?
That's what we do, yes.
You're not giving it to the authorities?
We give it to the authorities when our investigation's concluded. And
When-
because we have such a quality, long-spanning investigation, that's the only reason authorities are able to take it seriously.
I think
Now, you're
sometimes we
concerned
end
about-
up with weeks and weeks and weeks of footage, and just the logistics of going through that footage and noting down each instance of animal welfare breaches takes some time. And then as soon as we have done that, we hand it over to the authorities.
Right, so have you taken it to the media in that time?
Not before we take it to the authorities, no.
All right, and you're concerned with animal welfare. Do you have any PhD or training in animal?
I don't think you need that to care about the welfare of animals. I think most people care about the welfare of animals.
Okay.
Thanks, Ms Broad. We have a little bit more time. Do we have any more questions from Mr Berger or Mr McIntosh on the screen?
Not from me, thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Mr Berger. Mr McIntosh? We still might have lost him. Ms Copsey?
Yeah, I did have a question around the.
Want me to ask a question first?
Yeah, if you've got one ready to go. Yes,
Wonderful.
Thank you.
I've got one too, Chair.
I presumed you would, Mrs MacArthur.
Good.
Obviously, a lot of the feedback you get from people who oppose the work that you do is that your investigations are illegal. What are some of the things that the government and the farming industries could do to stop you doing this work and increase transparency?
Well, there's a lot of talk around CCTV. Our belief is that this CCTV needs to be publicly accessible, because otherwise, whichever third party it is that's monitoring this CCTV, they are bound to whatever poor welfare laws exist at the time. If there's cruelty happening, but it's legal, there's nothing they can do about it. The CCTV hasn't achieved anything. But if it's publicly accessible and any member of the public can log in and see what's happening, make up their own mind as to whether they support it, or groups like us can then review that footage, and if we see something happening, then we can report it to the authorities, then we've got no reason to trespass. If these industries are transparent on their own, we've got no reason to force that transparency on them.
And I guess just to tie that up, do you want to be doing this work?
Absolutely not.
Definitely not how I'd choose to spend my time.
Thank you. Ms Copsey?
Thank you. That was my question, actually. But I did have another question about powers that you think would be useful to enhance the effectiveness of regulatory bodies, inspection and other powers.
I suppose unannounced inspections, the ability to seize footage immediately and review it.
So something is that a lot of these facilities do have CCTV, however they're mainly used internally, so it's kind of if a worker has an injury or an incident, then they might be reviewed. In the fact that we entered these facilities and installed cameras and weren't caught on camera shows how little they view this footage. I think, as Chris mentioned, unannounced inspections, mandatory inspections as well, and not only just going in, having a look around, giving the thumbs up, but seizing CCTV, reviewing it, examining it. We have been providing, as we mentioned, all of this slaughterhouse footage to PrimeSafe and to the kind of relevant other authorities in other states, and every time an investigation is opened, and a lot of the time some really severe breaches of animal welfare are found. The fact that this keeps on happening shows that this is a systemic issue.
Thank you. Dr. Heath?
I think was Mrs. McArthur before?
I was just going in order. There's time for both of you. Yep.
At what point do you see yourself stopping breaking the law and into farms? Would it be if we cease CO2 use, or would it be at the phasing out of the industry?
It would be at the phasing out of the industry. I mean, we've said that CO2 is not the only bad way to do things. It's all bad. And if CO2 is phased out, then we will focus more on how bad the alternatives are.
Okay, so presumably you've done all the economic modelling as to the cost of phasing out
I think
I
that
think
would be
that's
the
our
government's
job.
job.
Yeah, it's your job?
That
No,
would be
no, I
the
think
Well,
it's
it
the
should be,
government's
because
job.
you're suggesting
Make us
we
the
shut
government, by
down
all
an
means.
industry.
I ran for election,
So
actually, yeah.
what, you must have some idea what the cost to the, I presume the taxpayer, is going to be.
So
to
right now,
phase out
millions of
the
dollars of
farming
taxpayer-
pig farmers or any other meat production.
Divert it from the industry.
Yeah,
Right now, millions of dollars of government funding, taxpayers' money, is going to Australian Pork Limited. Despite that, there hasn't been any sign that they've been putting any of that into investing into alternatives to CO2 stunning, into alternatives for sow stalls and farrowing crates. The industry has remained unchanged for 20 years.
They put that money into marketing. For their own
Marketing, get some
industry.
pork on your fork. That is what they're using taxpayers' money for. So
How is that
you can
appropriate?
take that
Building
money.
gas chambers with taxpayer money.
So we're
How
going
is
to
that
close
appropriate?
down the pig industry, the beef industry, the lamb industry, the chicken industry. You must have some idea. What is the cost to the taxpayer?
Why does it
of
matter?
Why does it matter?
Okay,
Because
Mr.
taxpayers
McArthur,
have
that's
to
now
fund it.
that's now
This
been
is an
three.
inquiry
That's
about
order.
welfare of animals.
Order. There's now been 3 questions, Mr. McArthur. I've been very generous with your extra questions, especially since you missed the opening remarks.
Well, I refused to
Ms.
answer.
Broad, do you have a final question?
Yes, thank you. Mr. Delforce, you just mentioned that you're a candidate. Was that with the Animal Justice
Yes, it
Party?
was.
So it's the same as the chair of this committee,
That's
Animal
right.
Justice Party, who self-referenced this inquiry?
Yes.
Okay. And do you think that there's a problem then with your
No, I mean, this
presentation
is an
being
inquiry
objective?
that we were pushing the Victorian government to hold.
Sorry, can I just state, please, members, we had a discussion, and you're aware of this, outside of this hearing, where I declared very clearly to you that I know Mr. Delforce, and I think this is getting rather inappropriate now. So unless you have a question in relation to the inquiry, we'll leave it there.
Well, I think it's relevant because that's how the inquiry came about, and he just mentioned that he was a candidate. So I was just
But it
checking
should have
which
come
one.
about from the government. Why didn't it? Instead, they just ignored it. This is clearly an issue Victorians
I
care
also
about.
think that questioning the integrity of the chair of this committee is extremely inappropriate, and I will not participate in answering that question.
Thank you. We might just leave it there. Thank you very much for your time today and the effort that you've put into your presentation. That includes the hearing, and all Hansard and broadcast equipment can now be turned off.